one of those events that continue to shape the contemporary relationship, I would say. In Darwin's work and its early reception, we already discover, at least in seed form, that the interaction between science and theology, or wider science and theology, includes both conflict and efforts to overcome the conflict. Unsurprisingly, conflict always attracts more attention than any efforts at reconciliation. That's true of all realities, including theology and science dialogue. So the conflict was also fueled by, in the modern times, fueled and also fueling what Charles Taylor once called the secularization thesis, the idea that, quote unquote, religion must intrigue before reason. An example of this heightened focus on conflict is perhaps one of the examples is the dramatic confrontation between the Bishop of Oxford, Samuel Wilberforce, and one of the Darwin's staunchest advocates, Thomas Huxley, at the 1860 meeting of the British Association for the Advancement of Science in Oxford. At the close of his remarks, Wilberforce immediately turned to Huxley and asked whether he was, quote, descended from an ape on the side of his grandmother or his grandfather. Huxley reportedly was white with anger as he rose and replied severely that he would rather be descended from an ape than from a man who uses intellect and influence to introduce ridicule into the grave scientific discussion. If we were, so this was supposed to be an illustration of that confrontation. And if we are to move beyond the conflict, whether real or imagined, between science and theology, what alternative paths can guide us forward? That's my question for tonight. Specifically, what sustains the genuine end in the dialogue between theology and science? And what transforms that conjunction into something else, such as work, from, or how? In response, I explore here what I believe to be three untenable alternatives for preserving the Bible: theology for science, that's my outline, theology from science, and theology of science. After examining those three options, in conversation about some of today's leading voices in theology and science dialogue, the theology and science dialogue, I'll return to Bert Lonergan, to his work for retrieving a fourth, I think more promising alternative that grounds that relationship between the two and the dynamic unity of consciousness. So first, theology or science. This approach basically seals theology off from science. It is often characterized less by an active stance, at least on the part of theologians, but also on the part of scientists, but more by a silent lack of mutual engagement on either side. When theologians overlook challenging scientific questions, whether due to their scientific naivety or perhaps personal preference, I think they risk missing an opportunity to, as Lonergan would put it, to rise to the level of our own times. For instance, can a theologian today truly discuss death as a punishment for sin, very traditional patristic claim, a biblical claim, without considering how this aligns with current understandings of biological evolution? Be sure the relative autonomy of science and theology should be acknowledged. However, there is no need to turn distinction into separation. I'll talk more about that. Darwin himself seemed aware of this balance, and as evidenced especially by his inclusion of two theological epigraphs at the opening of on the origin of species in 1859, and also in his invocation of secondary causality for the book's conclusion. So just let us look for a moment at those epigraphs quickly. One of the theological epigraphs was the quotation from William Wavell's Bridgewater Treatise, and the other one from Francis Bacon's book. Wavell here stated that in the materialist, events are brought about not by insulating interpositions of divine power exerted in each particular case, but by the establishment of general laws. So you see here the divine power being involved in this first epigraph. And then, according to Bacon, one could never have too much knowledge of either the book of God's word or the book of God's works. So divinity or theology and philosophy. Rather, let man endeavor an endless practice for proficiency in both. So both the book of God's word and the book of God's works is equally important according to this epigraph. Interestingly, in the closing of Darwin's book, the original of species, he also noted that conceiving of God as ordinarily working through the secondary, or we might say instrumental forces, only adds to the rule and marvel and the wisdom of that creator. So he wrote, to my mind, it accords better with what we know of the laws impressed on matter by the creator, that the production